So thanks for having us all here. This is Economic Opportunities and Next Steps for Wyoming. I'm Justin Loika. I'm the Energy Program Director at the Nature Conservancy. I'm here with Lily Barkow from DEQ, with Hillary O'Brien from ClearPath, Devin Brubaker from the airport in Southwest Wyoming, and Ben Cook from the College of Business here at UW. And we're going to talk about these economic opportunities. And I'm going to start us off here. I'm going to talk about economic opportunities in DAC and carbon removal specifically. We've heard a lot today from some exemplary presentations about Wyoming's opportunities for keeping legacy industries going. But I wanted to lay out an example of Wyoming's energy opportunities or new economic opportunities. And what we're seeing is we have, in this particular example, external environmental regulation from elsewhere in the country and world that's creating a market for Wyoming's natural resources. And we're seeing Wyoming take a forward-looking view and put in place smart regulations that are both responsible and business-friendly and potentially creating a revenue path for the use of this natural resource. And hopefully in the long-term future, we're creating a successful industry that's supporting state services, supporting communities, providing jobs, and sees widespread support both politically and culturally in the state. And now hopefully I'm describing there the future of the carbon removal industry in Wyoming. But what I'm actually describing is the coal industry in Wyoming, which was created in the, well, not created, but the market for Wyoming coal was greatly increased with the passage of the Clean Air Act in the 70s. Wyoming took a similar tact of regulation towards regulation and tax processes to tax policy, excuse me, to set themselves up for success. And we've seen how that's thrived and how Wyoming has thrived due to that industry. And I think that we need to look at those examples and where we've done really well in the past so that we can move forward into the future with carbon removal. Like I said before, we can see why carbon capture can help our legacy industries in the state, but we also are looking at compliance markets from other parts of the country, coastal states, countries across the world, that are creating a market for Wyoming's natural resources, our pore space and our ability to store carbon. And the other part is corporate buyers who are also driving the early stages of this. But we're going to need to respond to those. That's who our customers are at this. So that's what we need to think about. It's a little different than the way we've done it before. And that, but I think we've heard a few numbers thrown around today too. $130 billion, $200 billion for meeting these demands and meeting these goals that many entities are setting for this industry. I could be wrong about this number, so don't put this one in the newspaper or something if anybody's quoting us out here, but I think our GDP in Wyoming is somewhere around $20 billion. Anybody can shout out our correct number if I'm wrong?
45 to 46 billion.
Okay, 45 to 46, thank you. Thank you, I was way off. But the point is, that's a lot smaller than 200 billion, and a small piece of this market could be very, very impactful to the state of Wyoming, and we should endeavor to capture that, because even if this market doesn't reach its full potential worldwide, it could be transformative for our economy and our future here in the state. And there's a lot of challenges that we're going to need to address. We've heard a lot about water. Energy is obviously a huge, huge piece of this puzzle. There's also a few we haven't talked about. There's a major issue with scaling these industries, specifically in DAC and CDR. There's a lot of pilot projects, there's a lot of lab projects right now, but building a technology in a lab and then putting it on a landscape and building out an entire industry and the infrastructure that supplies it is a whole nother thing. And Wyoming has a lot of that knowledge, and we need to connect that to these startups and help them build success, because we've already seen some examples in the state of what happens when you try to go and bridge that gap and how difficult it can be. There's also just support. We know we have a high energy IQ in our public and our institutions in Wyoming, but this is weird. We're not selling a normal product. We're selling a certificate. And that's going to be hard for people to understand. And we have to understand that CO2 is not necessarily a waste. It's a product. And that's going to be tough too. And then we have to look at how we can do state revenue and how we can this not only supply jobs, but can this supply revenue and positive impact to the state's budget and the services that the state needs to provide, and that we're staring down some revenue deficits in the future. And I think this is going to be could be a really important part of bridging those and building a diversified state economy. So with that, I really appreciate Roads to Removal for having us here. And I want to pass this over to Lily, who's going to talk to us about Class 6 wells.
So, thanks. So thanks for having me here today. And so part of the process, that for industry to get out there and scale up these projects is permitting and regulatory requirements. And so this is a figure of various Class 6 projects that are occurring across Wyoming. There was a lot of mention of the Southeast sequestration hub for tallgrass, and they've been issued 6 permits to construct in September, and then most recently in October. Then, of course, a lot of focus on that southwest corner with Frontier. They have 3 permits to construct as well. And we have 1 permit application currently outside of Casper, and that's under review. And then mentioning the Dry Fork Station area for their wells are currently in the beginning stages of their carbon safe project, so they're under Class 1, but they are built to Class 6 standards. So we're very active when it comes to these projects that are going on. The reason why Wyoming, having Class 6 primacy really helps with the economics for the industry is permitting timelines. We get the permit applications in. We're able to review those because we like to say Wyoming knows Wyoming. We're staffed with individuals that are part of the community. They live here, they work here, they have families here, their kids attend school. So we're well invested, in working on these applications. We have University of Wyoming alumni students that are part of this, and then just the legal regulatory framework that's in place. The UIC program for Wyoming has been in place since 1983. So while we say Class 6 is relatively new, we're not really new to this entire process. We've been working on deep disposal wells, which are comparable to the Class 6 program for sequestration. So we've got a lot of knowledge, and we've been working on it for quite some time. And the discussions on the Class 2 or enhanced oil recovery wells, again, a long history of completing those sequestration as part of that. We have a robust legislation that started in 2008, putting together a work group to evaluate what Class 6 would look like for that sequestration, making sure that the residents of Wyoming are not left holding any financial burdens, if any of these projects were to leave. And then, where can we make sure that the risks are mitigated? So it's been worked on for quite some time, and for us to get where we are, and that's where we address the economic portion for these projects.
Thanks, Lily. We'll go next to Ben to hear about the entrepreneurship and the other business-oriented side of opportunities that we can have in Wyoming.
Sure, thanks. My name is Ben Cook. I'm an assistant dean for the College of Business. The reason I'm on stage today is because I wrote my dissertation on enhanced oil recovery and spent about 7 years with the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute working on enhanced oil recovery, carbon capture, and those kinds of issues. Before, I don't know why I did it, but it's been a good switch. I became the MBA program director at the university, kind of switched into higher ed administration, but it's a very, I see these worlds coming together in interesting ways. When we think about economic development for Wyoming, I've had I'm a Wyoming guy. I grew up in Cheyenne, went to a couple community colleges. I've been here a long time. We always talk about economic diversification and what that really looks like or could look like. I've also been privileged to be part of this story of carbon capture, and I'm really emphasizing the arc of the role of policy and the way industry is developed is kind of an important thing to appreciate. When I finished my dissertation, oil prices were well over $100, and there was amazing opportunities for enhanced oil recovery, in my opinion. A few years later, the oil prices crashed, and no one cared about enhanced oil recovery anymore because it wasn't economic for the oil fields. And so we started working on a lot of different issues, and during that time I got to work with Matt Fry and others at the Great Plains Institute on state policy working groups, and realized all the different ways that policy incentives can bridge gaps within business deals. And so what I want to point out, first of all, is maybe an understanding that for many, many years it was always like we could make the enhanced oil recovery work, and we kind of know how to do post-combustion capture on a coal plant, but we can't get those two industries to work together. And even for a point of time, we thought maybe we're getting closer to making this work with Petronova and the W.A. Parish plant in Texas, and even that had problems when it closed down in the pandemic. But there's a difference between building a coal plant and having to finance it for 30 to 50 years and wanting a steady stream of reliable revenue to pay for the cost of that project and to get that financed by Wall Street, versus an oil field that has a dynamic stochastic oil price that goes up and down. And so the oil companies want a variable price for the CO2, and the coal power plant wants a fixed price because that's how they're financing their operation, and there ends up being a wedge between these opportunities. I think what we've seen with the evolution of 45Q tax credits is a real opportunity to think about those wedges being closed, because we can combine storage with EOR, and there's significant incentives to make those opportunities happen. And yet, we see sequestration almost like we're jumping the shark. We went right from sequestration to we're just going to build renewables and nuclear. So we're talking a lot about nuclear in the state, which is fantastic. But what I'm looking at for economic opportunity is AI has completely changed the game. I think maybe I'm the first person to say AI today. That's a strange thing in a conference. Usually everyone says the word AI. The power demand coming from AI is ginormous. So if you just look at what's happening in Europe with the AI data centers, it's like the combined demand of the Netherlands, Portugal, and Greece just in the next 5 years from building AI data centers. Just last week, we talked to a capital group that's coming to Wyoming that wants to build AI data centers in a couple different counties. Massive power demand. Their biggest problem is trying to figure out how to get power for these things. I think we have a tremendous opportunity to say, instead of planning to shut down about 77 gigawatts of coal-fired power generation in the next 10 years, it's going to take a while to permit nuclear facilities. I mean, Microsoft's permitting to reopen 3 Mile Island and to build nuclear generation with companies that have never built nuclear generation before. That's how much power they're anticipating they're going to need in the future. It's a perfect opportunity to take advantage of 45Q, those tax credits, to keep these coal plants operating with post-combustion capture. You can get some enhanced oil recovery for it. I know there's concern about life cycle analysis there, but I can tell you that there's something in life cycle analysis that I think is missing, which is the offset or displaced oil that would have been produced if we weren't doing it with enhanced oil recovery. If I do something with enhanced oil recovery, I don't have to drill a few more wells someplace else that may not have carbon capture. And so there's a benefit there that doesn't always get taken into account. I'll just close by saying that what I get to work on now with MBA students is entrepreneurship. And so we've launched a venture MBA at the University of Wyoming, and it's all about creating the kinds of entrepreneurs that are willing to stay in our state, that are familiar with our state, and that will change business here. And so what we're seeing is companies like Carbonado. You may have heard of a group with SER that developed a technology for taking coal char from pyrolysis and turning into building materials. Well, how do you commercialize that? We might have the science to technically do something, but can we commercially do it? And that's where I get to pair MBA students with scientists over in SER and say, hey, can we figure out how to turn this into an actual business and work on that from an entrepreneurial perspective? And so there's tremendous opportunities there, but it takes more than just the technology. You have to pair it with the right business mindset and the right types of policies to get there.
I guess many of you are probably wondering why is an airport director sitting up here on stage at a carbon removal symposium, and I'll tell you, it's straight economics. So several years ago, I was serving as the chair of our county economic development board. and I was contacted by a CDR company, a DAC company, that was looking at Southwest Wyoming, looking at announcing at the time what would have been the largest direct air capture facility in the world. And they reached out and mentioned that they'd like to meet, like to dive in. And of course, I said, absolutely. We'd love to learn more. We want to diversify our economy across the region. Knew we had sequestration. We had the rocks. It's rock springs. We had the great rocks like Scott talks about, the rock formations well below the surface. And so meeting with this company, it really opened my eyes to opportunities across Southwest Wyoming with the Rock Springs uplift, with our industrial emitters that we have as well. And so while that DAC company recently announced that they were not going to be staying in Wyoming, that may come up later, who knows, but it didn't mean that the industry was dead in Wyoming. So we at the airport, we're looking at the fact that we sit on top of the Rock Springs uplift. We have an industry that still exists that needs support, whether that be the Trona industry, Simplot phosphates, Jim Bridger power plant, whatever's needed there to take those CO2 emissions and sequester those. We saw an opportunity that we could monetize the assets of the airport. We had pore space. We have over 1,200 acres of land, so we have over 1,200 acres of pore space. We're very closely located to Simplot phosphates and the Jim Bridger power plant. We're also right off of a UP main line and rail spur, and then there's also pipelines nearby. So it gave us an opportunity to start talking to these companies and really diving in with some of these CDR companies and looking at how do we take the airport and think about non-aeronautical revenue and also provide a service to our users. So the aviation industry is looking at how do they become net zero or carbon neutral. And as you can imagine, you can't exactly hook up a pipe to the tailpipe of an airplane and collect that CO2. So the only way to do that is with DAC. If you want to remove those emissions from the air. And so what we're looking at, and it's kind of back of the napkin sketch right now, I've been working with Scott and his team and others around the state to develop this, is becoming the first airport in the world that is a carbon removal hub, where we have direct air capture, where we have a Class 6 well that can inject, or multiple Class 6 wells that can inject that CO2. And then we're also want to take it one step further and look at the utilization and see if we can then create synthetic jet fuel. So we sell quite a bit of jet fuel every year, and it would be a great thing if we could produce synthetic jet fuels right on or near the airport to cut down on those transportation costs. So we're looking at all those, and for largely 2 years, I couldn't rack my brain around how do I power it and where do I get the produced heat for the DAC units. And as many of you have seen, and the news that's been picking up, seems like daily, nuclear microreactors are becoming more and more of a thing. And so we are in discussions with multiple manufacturers at this point for microreactors to look at the ability to set up micronuclear at the airport to power all of these technologies as well as power the airport. Today there was a pretty important hearing in front of the PSC. If anybody knows how that went, please tell me later. But there's a rulemaking in front of the PSC today that could really open the door for this for us and allow us to capitalize, have that green energy, that carbon neutral energy that this industry is looking for, and allow us to monetize our resources, both our land and our subsurface pore space.
Thanks, Devin. And there's a whole bunch of opportunities like that in the state that we need to grasp. And Hillary's going to tell us from a wider perspective what kind of what are the advantages that we have to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm here to bring the federal perspective. So, hello. My name is Hillary. I'm with ClearPath. And for those of you that aren't familiar with ClearPath, we are a DC-based conservative clean energy advocacy organization whose mission is to accelerate American innovation to reduce global energy emissions. And to do this, we work closely with our federal government, modeling successful energy case studies to get a good picture of the entire innovation ecosystem. And that means everything from private sector innovators to federal R&D, market incentives, and permitting. And that means we spend a lot of time thinking about promising emission reduction pathways like carbon dioxide removal and the clean firm power, the new technologies that are needed to actually power those, and what opportunities those present for states like Wyoming. And what we've been talking about today and what we see is that Wyoming, because of its abundant natural resources and existing energy infrastructure and expertise, has strategic opportunities to take advantage of federal funding in this space. And these were laid out very well in the Roads to Removal report. And we saw that, we've talked about this, we've heard from the actual authors of the report, so I won't belabor the point, but we've seen at the federal level that Wyoming is well positioned to lead in things like direct air capture, in CCUS, at power or industrial facilities, and other sequestration technologies. When it comes to funding, there are opportunities for Wyoming innovators to lead the way in driving down the cost and proving out these technologies at scale. For instance, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or what we'll call the IIJA, invested $12 billion into DOE's R&D activities in the carbon management space. So everything from $3.5 billion for the DAC hubs to $2.5 billion for carbon storage and transportation, but also strategic demand-side initiatives like the CDR Purchase Pilot Prize. So it's an initiative stewarded by the federal government to directly purchase CDR credits from producers. But as we were just hearing, beyond the removals themselves, as other panelists throughout the day and just now, clean and reliable power is an essential component of the CDR business case. And through the IIJA, there are also significant resources for clean firm power for everything from advanced geothermal energy, advanced nuclear energy, and also CCS with carbon capture at coal-fired power plants. And again, as we've been talking about today, Wyoming is already leading the way in accelerating energy and innovation in these. Just a couple examples. In carbon storage, as we've heard, Wyoming is already a key partner with the DOE Carbon Save program. Last month, we saw Meridian Carbon receive $9 million from DOE in funding for its Steamboat Carbon Storage Hub. And as we've heard a number of times today, folks are super excited about the Dry Fork Power Station in Gillette that's been awarded $5 million of federal funding, part of an up to $50 million cost share from DOE for a carbon capture pilot project, ensuring that it will enable the development of clean firm power in the form of coal power production with CCS. And in addition to federal R&D opportunities for Wyoming, there's also critical financial incentives, as Ben was alluding to earlier, for Wyoming to invest in these technologies. We know the 45Q tax credit stands as, again, cornerstone policy for accelerating investments in direct air capture, playing a critical role in scaling CDR solutions. And we know that today Wyoming is home to more than 35 facilities that are potentially eligible for the 45Q tax credit. And for those of you that aren't as familiar with this, in 2022, in the Inflation Reduction Act, critical improvements were made to 45Q, raising the credit value for both point source and direct air capture, extending the commenced construction deadlines, and increasing the numbers of eligible facilities. And since then, as we know, the IRS has released some guidance on 45Q, including for life cycle analysis and procedures and direct pay. We are still waiting for the IRS to release additional guidance on how on the changes made to 45Q in that interim. And so looking ahead to next Congress, next year is a tax bill year. It would have been in any election outcome. There may be an opportunity to advance additional improvements in a 2025 tax package. And that could include restoring the value of 45Q by adjusting for inflation immediately and using an earlier base adjustment year, establishing parity for carbon utilization for things like EOR and permanent geologic storage as well, and extending, again, the commenced construction deadline beyond 2033. I think we had a conversation earlier during one of our other panels around some of those 2025 targets. Extending that construction deadline would continue to incentivize innovation as some of those targets begin to shift. And so I mentioned next Congress. So what about next Congress? I think the big red elephant in the room is when you look at the whole picture of what the Republican trifecta has to do. Next Congress is starting in January. So that is a Republican-controlled House and Senate and the incoming administration. The things they need to do, they need to fix the broken permitting system, bring more manufacturing back to the United States, accelerate technological innovation across sectors of our economy, and grow new American clean firm power here and abroad. It's a lot of work. They have a lot of work to do. And unfortunately, the administration, the incoming administration, and Congress does have a pretty decent track record on those issues. And while there may be changes, and I understand that we talked earlier today about the challenges associated with change. Overall, I think this is good news for those that are interested in the opportunities I just outlined. And out of everyone's mind, more specifically, is questions of the durability of federal programs that were authorized by the IIJA and the IRA. And so I would be highly skeptical of anyone who tells you that a significant or wholesale repeal of either law is forthcoming. I'd say that many top Republicans, including Speaker Mike Johnson, have said things like they're considering the scalpel rather than the sledgehammer approach when it comes to revisiting or amending those laws. And so myself, without, of course, making any predictions, speaking for anyone, I'd say that the case for optimism is just in a couple quick facts that Republican states, like the ones we've been talking about today, are often the recipients of CCUS innovation dollars. For example, our research shows that carbon storage projects like DOE funded under award negotiation have site projects selected. A majority are located in Republican governed states. And let's remember one of the key Trump administration key policy wins from the last time around was the Energy Act of 2020, which included comprehensive reauthorizations of DOE's RD&D activities and preserving those programs for the foreseeable future. And while there were some major outliers, the hubs themselves included, we know that the IIJA appropriations were, in many cases, just straight funding of those authorization levels in the Energy Act of 2020 that was signed into law by the Trump administration. And another win for that administration the last time around was indeed 45Q, that they expanded and extended 45Q not once but twice in the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 and in the Taxpayer Certainty and Disaster Relief Act of 2020. And we know that that's been highly successful ever since 2018, and more than 200 USDCUS projects have been announced. So all that to say, a lot of case for optimism, a lot of opportunities for Wyoming, and happy to talk to you more about this in the Q&A period.
Thanks, Hillary. We're going to get into some Q&A now, and I just wanted to say that if your question doesn't get answered in the time we have allotted, there is going to be a reception outside of this room after all the panels are complete. As many speakers as can stay will be out there, and you can ask questions one-on-one there, so don't feel like this is your only time to get a question in. I'm going to do at least one to our panel before we go to the audience, but so this is a series of nascent industries that we're talking about up here, and Wyoming, we've talked a lot about today, all the steps that the state has taken to put regulation in place, to gain primacy in regulation, and we've really set up a lot of these industries quite well. But there are still things that we can do as a state and as communities to move these industries forward, and get them more on the ground in Wyoming and have them have an impact in our state. So I'm just curious what each panelist thinks would be one thing that we could do to move forward one or more of these industries. And in order to give you all a little time to think, I'll answer this first. One thing that really gets an industry a lot of political and a lot of community support in the long term in Wyoming is how does it affect our state services? How does it affect our revenue picture? And our state is built on severance taxes. It's like a huge part of how we gain revenue from our coal, oil, gas, and other mining industries. And as we look to diversify, we need to find industries that are going to assist in that process. And carbon removal can do that because similar to mining or harvesting oil and gas, you are utilizing, when you're doing permanent sequestration in the state, you're utilizing a non-renewable resource, and you're asking the state to take on long-term liability once your permits are completed and closed and you've done your reclamation and your bonding is finished. You're asking the state to take on long-term reclamation of your project and the resource that you've injected into the ground. So to me, and a lot of the folks that I speak to, it feels like the state should have a short-term benefit to provide services to its community and build up our state so that we can handle that liability in the long term. And I don't know what that number is. I'm not enough of an expert to know if it should be one number or different for different industries. But I think providing a path to revenue for these industries, state revenue, will provide it political cover, long-term political support, and will show communities how this is going to be additive to our state and not just a industry where we're storing other people's waste or cleaning up other people's messes, which is some of the narratives you hear out there from less educated parties that we would like to change. Does anyone on our panel want to run first? Looks like Devin's excited.
Well, I wanted to go first so nobody steals what I was going to say, because somebody will, I think. I actually have two things that I would change right away if I could. Number one being energy freedom, having the ability, and I'm hoping the PSC made some smart decisions this morning on their Chapter 6 rules. And the second is public perception. As somebody that was heavily involved in Project Bison's community relations and community engagement, there is so much misinformation out there about this industry. And I think, Hillary, you hit on the fact that this is not a partisan industry, even though for some reason in Wyoming, it has been tied to partisan politics. And that has been a challenge. And it's not, if we could look at it as an economic opportunity in the state versus a Green New Deal, Washington-driven political agenda, I think we could see a lot of changes there.
Yeah, I guess I agree with the aspect of education and outreach. That there is quite a bit of misinformation out there, and a lot of things that I've heard here today have been really beneficial. Getting an understanding of that especially when it comes to Class 6, it's part of a toolbox. It's not the only solution, and it's part of a number of solutions to get this addressed. And so and then understanding those particular roles and responsibilities, that come with each of those different technologies, for carbon management. I'd also say, when it comes to industry, having a better, understanding or guaranteed regulations, knowing, as it's been said today, with the federal lands and the having a checkerboard pattern in the southwest corner of the state, what exactly is the federal responsibilities that come there, and especially when they don't have those policies in place for how they're going to work with states versus other federal agencies. We're continuously playing this game of catch up. When the science is there, we're trying to advance these technologies, but the regulations need to constantly catch up, and then how we can all work together. So I think that regulatory certainty is an area that when coming to work with the federal government is probably an area that at least talking to permit applicants when they come in is an area to be addressed.
So I absolutely agree with everything Lily and Devin already said, but to add on to that, one difficulty we know also next year, the PHMSA is likely to be reauthorized, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which currently we're awaiting PHMSA's proposed rule on CO2 pipelines. So the entire communication on the safety of the carbon management ecosystem, not just storage, but transportation as well. We know the safest way to do this today is through pipelines, but in fact, PHMSA we're still waiting on their proposed rule on how to develop safety standards for those in law. So I think something that would be helpful, and again, just building, I agree with everything you both said, would be for PHMSA to have clearer direction from Congress in how to set those guidelines.
I was kind of waiting for Hillary to go because I wasn't sure she's going to talk about long-term liability or not. It's been a few years since I've thought about this, but as I worked with Great Plains Institute as part of the state working group, a huge thing was this long-term liability. And as I built project finance models for the Dry Fork Station and thinking about carbon capture, trying to price long-term liability, even as we talk to insurance companies that are used to doing difficult to understand risks, this is just something that no one can get their head around. And I think Carbon Safe has done an amazing job of de-risking storage and sequestration of CO2 long-term. I think we understand it better than we ever have. I don't know where federal policy is on this, but I really believe, if I can just say one thing, federal government should assume long-term liability for carbon sequestration and just take that off of the states, take that off of the local people, Maybe there's a short-term period of monitoring that needs to happen where that's on the companies for the first 5 or 10 years for liability. As long as they comply with regulations, the federal government can assume long-term liability. I think it would make the bankers feel a lot happier. I know you're like, well, why do we care about bankers? In order to get these projects financed, you have to have some level of regulatory certainty. And so the IRS continuing to punt the ball on like issuing guidance on direct pay for these carbon credits. And if you aren't familiar with direct pay, it just basically means that instead of having to go pre-sell your carbon credits for tax equity to finance your project, the IRS just refunds you the money and gives it directly to you. That is a cash flowable thing that bankers understand. They're like, okay, the money's going to come in and you're going to be able to pay your bills. Okay, maybe then I will finance your project. And so having regulatory certainty about long-term liability, what the dynamics are of direct pay, and things like that can really move the needle on getting the capital to flow to make these projects happen and make them real. In many cases, the technologies are actually not that complicated, but getting the financing is. So that's what I would say is my one thing.
That's great, Ben. Do we have any audience questions?
Wait.
Mr. Brubaker, you used a term I've not heard before, energy freedom.
And I might get crucified for using those words in Wyoming, but it boils down to being able to generate electricity for yourself or for a limited number of non-public consumers. And so there is a rulemaking that was heard at 9 a.m. this morning in front of the Public Service Commission that would allow for a company to generate electricity and sell to a limited number of non-public consumers. So if you have, for instance, let's say Evercore using BWXT's micronuclear reactor, they can set up a reactor and then be able to sell to 2, 3, 4 consumers, industrial consumers or other, without being considered a public utility, or being able to establish microgrids, things like that. In Wyoming, the regulatory framework, the statutes do not really support that level of creativity, if you will. While it is become somewhat standard in other states, here we historically have protected our public utilities. And with all due respect to our public utilities, they all haven't tried to protect us as the consumers. And so there's some in the state that are really easy or easier to work with, and there's others, primarily one on the western side of the state, that is very, very difficult to work with. Not the local people, mind you, but the actual company itself is very difficult to work with to move innovative projects forward.
Okay. This may be not a question, but more like a comment or maybe discussion. So kind of the goal here in this symposium is to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and decrease the total amount of CO2 over time. And I was just looking at ClearPath's website, and under their clean energy category, they have nuclear, storage, natural gas, carbon capture, hydropower, and geothermal. One thing, so geothermal obviously is very clean. Nuclear, if you can figure out what to do with the waste. But one of the concerns I have is that we are not so siloed that we're only thinking about how to remove carbon, but we're making sure that whatever we're doing to remove carbon, we're not also having severe negative effects on the environment, on habitat, on wildlife. And hydropower has been shown to have pretty negative effects on river systems, and led to like losses of fish species and stuff. So is that something you guys even consider in your companies, or you're pretty focused on making money using CO2 capture as a way to make money? But because on the ClearPath website, there's absolutely no discussion or mention of any potential negative effects of some of these. So just curious how that plays into your business.
I'm gonna jump in front of this one for Hillary and say that, yeah, no worries. Oh, yeah, of course. and say that, yeah, I think it's ubiquitous that when you're deploying industrial projects, you're going to have environmental impacts, and that's a huge deal always for every project that you're developing, whether that's a new coal-fired gas plant or coal-fired power plant or a carbon removal facility. And at the Nature Conservancy, we have we feel really we have goals that are often in conflict because of that. Because on one hand, we look at what the IPCC says about how to ameliorate the worst effects of climate change. And you're going to have to deploy a lot of industrial projects to do that. But our roots are in landscape protection. And we're a big landowner in this state, and we spend a lot of time thinking about how land can be managed well with a lot of the people that you've seen here today, and what that means for keeping lands productive for wildlife and for habitat, and also for the human communities that rely on them and the environmental services that they provide. And so, yes, the short answer is yes, there are a lot of people thinking really hard about how those things touch down in the state. And for example, the Nature Conservancy's work in this space in the state is largely around directly interfacing with projects and companies that are building these projects and talking to them about, from the very beginning, how do you choose your site? Are you talking to the right people in the state about where those places will not affect the migration corridors of our big game animals, and what areas you need to be avoiding? How do you reduce the impact of your project even on the site you do choose? Are you clearing and grubbing and bulldozing all of the sagebrush off of your site? Or are you merely mowing it and allowing it to regrow? Or can you just set up your facilities on top of some of these and merely have your roads accessing them? Questions like that, and how you do your fencing, are a huge part of the proposals that go in and go through their permitting process with the Industrial Siting Division and the other parts of DEQ. So the short answer is yes, there's a lot of smart people thinking really hard about it, and it's a tough problem. You're right to bring it up.
Thank you. So from my understanding, it's that CO2, the main economic component of this is mostly financial tax credits, right? It's federal funding. It's not like there's an actual product to be sold at this point in time. It's more of we're storing waste, and it's based, the economic opportunities are based on policy. Is that correct?
I think, yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's kind of one of the core challenges of what we've been talking about today is like, how do we make the economics of carbon management, so not just CDR, but carbon management generally makes sense. And today we know it's just too expensive for in many applications, especially things like DAC. Yeah, not to speak for some of the more incumbent, or not incumbent, but existing technologies in the natural solution space that already exist and are already happening and economical. I would say that yes, right now we believe that the 45Q tax credit is so essential because it is needed to make the case, to make the business case for CDR technologies and get them to a point, we've been talking about scaling all day really, to get them to the point where the economics make sense. Functionally perhaps without those tax credits, but today yes, and that's why support for 45Q is something that we are strongly interested in.
Thanks for your questions. That's all the time we have for this panel, but you can catch us all outside of the reception afterwards. Thank you.